Today we're counting down the top 10 most valuable and most important key issues published by Marvel Comics in the year 1980. We're going to look at the top 10, and we're going to look at in-depth analysis of the rarity, the value, the increase in prices, and the historical aspect of these books. Starting with number 10 of the year, Uncanny X-Men 132. Now, keep in mind, it wasn't actually called Uncanny X-Men yet, but I'm using that title just because it would change to that shortly, and most people know it as that run. So number 10 is issue 132. You'll notice on my chart, it also ranks as the 33rd most valuable Marvel comic of the entire decade of the 1980s. You'll see, though, in the last 7 years in a row, it's been completely stalled in Raw 9.2 at $75. So while these X-Men comics are quite expensive, they've been expensive for decades, and in Raw, prices in the guide have actually been stalled for a bit. Let's look at more details on this book. Jason Weingart is revealed to be Mastermind. This book does feature John Byrne art. It's the 8th most valuable X-Men related comic of the 1980s, and print run estimated at 191,000 copies. The print run of X-Men had been growing every year, and that's why it was such a hot book at this time, because collectors kept joining this title. Everybody loved it. You'll see on the census there's over 1,400 copies graded by CGC, and 546 copies alone just graded 9.6 or better. Heritage has now sold 80 comics. Comics at this time now had a 40-cent cover price. Looking at the Overstreet annual price guide, we can compare the last 15 years here in all grades. You'll see in low grade, it's almost doubled, and over 15 years, it's more than doubled in high grade, but it has been stalled in all grades for the last 8 years. In the guide, on CGC, there are 150 9.8s graded and 396 9.6s. However, the UK price variant has been graded very little. There's only 3 copies graded, the best being a 9. The next most valuable book of the year in 9th place is X-Men 131, the issue that came right before it. This is the second appearance of Dazzler. We also get Emma Frost appearing in this issue. Again, John Byrne art, Chris Claremont story. And this also, again, all the issues this year, print run estimated at 191,000 copies. On the census, again, CGC over 1,400 copies, but a lot less, 9.6s or better, only 303. Again, Overstreet price guide, the same price structure for both of these issues. And there are 74 9.8s, 229 9.6s. Again, UK price variants, not many, the best being a 9.2. The 8th most valuable Marvel comic of the year is actually a magazine size format. It is Epic Illustrated magazine number 3. This is a major key book. It's the first appearance of Dreadstar. Looking at our price growth over the last 7 years, you'll see this book has gone up 10 times in value in a near mint raw condition. Also ranks as the 31st most valuable Marvel comic of the 80s. So this has only become a hot book in the last 7 years. Features the first appearance of Vanth Dreadstar, who would later get his own series. Elric of Melnibone also appears in this issue. Paul Gulacy painted cover and art. Nice, stunning orange cover. Print run estimated at 171,000 copies. Yes, this is the #1 most valuable magazine format Marvel product of 1980. Not many copies on the census, though. Only 265 overall. There are 155 9.6s or better. Heritage has sold very few copies of this in the last 20 years, only 5. Overstreet price guides in the last 4 years, you'll see that it has stalled in all grades. Make sure you check out current eBay sales and the GP analysis to see how graded high-grade copies are doing. And on the census, there are 69 9.8s and 86 9.6s. The 7th most valuable Marvel comic of the year is Powerman 66. Now, this book stands out as a book that was not a key for a long time, and then all of a sudden, people started paying attention to Sabretooth, realizing that this is Sabretooth's second appearance ever, and it actually is 3 years after his original debut. This is a Frank Miller cover. Luke Cage would appear in his own show. And estimated print run is only 106,000 copies. So this is really on the low end, one of Marvel's poorest selling titles in 1980. 467 copies graded, 179 9.6s or better. Heritage has not sold many. Overstreet Price Guide has not had much movement at all in lower grades. But in high grade, it's been stalled at $90 for the last 7 years, but it has doubled in the last 15. And on the census, we have 62 9.8s, 117 9.6s. Xmen 137 ranks in 6th place. Now we're really getting into some of the most valuable Marvel comics of the entire decade. And this one features the death of Phoenix. John Byrne cover art, Chris Claremont story. There are 6 copies that grade CGC 9.9. That's a lot of copies for a book this old. And it's the second most valuable X-Men comic of the decade. And print run again, 191,000. Almost 4,000 copies graded by CGC. This is a major key book. Everybody likes this, and over 1,500 9.6s or better. In the Overstreet Price Guide, it's been stalled for the last 10 years in lower grades. It's gone up a little bit in the highest grades, raw. On the census, we have 6 9.9s and 472 9.8s, over 1,000 9.6s. Next on our list, we have X-Men 130. This book has slowly been sneaking up the chart. And why is that? Because it's the first appearance of Dazzler. And Emma Frost appears in this issue. Again, John Byrne art. There is a 9.9 copies of this book as well. Almost 3,000 copies graded by CGC and almost 900 9.6s or better. Here's the cool disco flavored cover. Overstreet again, same results. Not much movement at all in lower grades, but in 15 years it has tripled in high grade raw. On the census, we have the 9.9 and 289.8s. A lot more UK price variants graded. There's even 3 9.6s. In 4th place for the year, now we're getting into the major key books. So here's another book that has gone up 11 times in value in just the last 7 years alone. Huge demand for this book and huge growth. Avengers 196 features the origin and first full appearance of the Taskmaster. Bold green background cover. It's the #2 most valuable Avengers comic of the 80s and ranking quite high for the entire decade. Taskmaster is Tony Masters. Look at the growth in just the last 6 years. How many copies have hit the census? 2,700 copies now with 616 9.6s or better. Notice at this point, we're into the 1980s. We have newsstand editions sold all over the place, from drugstores to confectionaries. And now we have the direct editions that are marketed specifically for comic book shops. How can you tell the difference? Well, the newsstand ones have a barcode in the bottom left corner. And then the Spider-Man logo or another picture will be featured on the direct edition. At this time, the newsstand edition is way more common. Do not believe people who tell you that all newsstands are rarer and more valuable. That is not true for comics of 1980. The direct edition is always rarer in the year 1980. In the Overstreet Price Guide, it's gone up 6 times in lowest grades. And again, I mentioned 11 times in high grade raw. On the census, we have 217 9.8s and 399 9.6s. There's also a ton of signature series copies of this book as well. And even the UK price variant has a lot of copies graded, including 9.6. Plus, there is a French-Canadian edition that came out later in 1984. Very rare, only 1 copy on the census. Star Wars #42 ranks in 3rd place of the year and 10th of the entire decade. This book has seen 10 times growth in the last 7 years. And it's really interesting because I used to sell a ton of Star Wars comics in the 90s. And at that time, you could find this book always in the dollar bins. I've had so many of them. It took me a long time to appreciate that the price was going up. It seemed kind of hokey, but I think these high prices are here to stay. This is an iconic cover. I love this cover. And it is the first appearance of Boba Fett, who has now gone on to become one of the most popular characters in the entire Star Wars universe. Yes, this is an adaptation of part of the Empire Strikes Back movie. Al Williamson cover and art. There is a 9.9 copy. Print run estimated at 255,000 copies. Again, this is one of Marvel's definite best-selling titles, if not their best-selling title in 1980. So don't be fooled thinking that this is a rare book. It's out there everywhere. On the census, again, it's gone crazy in the last 5 years. Look at that massive jump up to 3,200 copies graded and 1,000 9.6s. Heritage has started to perk up in sales as well. Overstreet price guide, tripled in lowest grades, and again, 10 times in high grades. On the census, we have 1 9.9, 343 9.8s. And we're getting up to the big top 2. This book has really taken us by surprise. It's really climbed the list. This book was not even in the top 10 in 2018. It's now in 2nd place. Look at this rank. It's jumped from 37th place to 7th place of the most valuable Marvel comics of the entire 1980s. Savage She-Hulk, featuring her first appearance and origin. And of course, it's the #1 issue as well. It's almost gone up 10 times in price in the last 7 years alone. Huge demand for this book. There are 3 copies graded 9.9. Print run estimated at 200,000. She-Hulk created by Stan Lee. On the census, it's just gone crazy. 8,500 copies graded, including almost 5,000 9.6s. Heritage has now sold 91. In the Overstreet price guide, even low grades are moving up every year because this book has so much movement. And in the last 2 years alone, in high grade raw, it has doubled. That's crazy growth. So you can just imagine the 9.8s that are graded will be breaking record sales all the time. On the census, we have over 2,000 9.8s and 2,500 9.6s. Crazy. And even there are 500 signature series copies of this book. So again, not rare at all, just super historically important. Everybody wants it. And the #1 most valuable and important Marvel comic of 1980 is X-Men 129. It ranks #1 of the year. Also ranks as the 4th most valuable Marvel comic of the entire decade of the 80s. And it has doubled in 9.2 raw prices in the last 7 years. And it features the first appearances of Kitty Pryde and the White Queen. John Byrne cover and art. It's the first X-Men comic released with a cover date in the 1980s, as it is the January 1980 issue, technically published at the end of 1979. And again, print run estimated at 191,000 copies. Again, CGC census going crazy in the last few years, almost 4,000 copies graded, including 1,100 9.6s or better. In the Overstreet price guide, it's more than doubled in lowest grades over this time period. And again, it's almost gone up 4 times in the last 15 years in raw 9.2. On the census, we have 311 9.8s, 793 9.6s. There are even 6 of the UK price variant graded 9.6 as well. Now, what I want to do quickly is compare these top 10 books on the CGC census. Which books stand out on the chart? Well, by far, Savage She-Hulk #1 has the most copies graded, 8,500. That is so much higher than the nearest book, which is X-Men 129 at 3,700 copies. What's interesting about this here is that 3 of the books actually have, actually 4 of them, 4 of these books actually have a 9.9 graded, with X-Men 137 with the most, with 6 of them. After that, what's the most common book? Again, it's the Savage She-Hulk #1 because there's over 2,000 9.8. which is the rarest book of this entire list? Well, by far, it is Epic Illustrated #3, magazine format. There's only 69 9.8s and only 265 copies in total graded. But also keep in mind, Powerman and Iron Fist 66, also very low on the census, 467 copies and only 62 9.8s. Well, there you go. That is the key most important books from Marvel Comics in the year 1980. Every week I publish a different year. So check back, please subscribe, and we'll see you again next week. Thanks for watching.